Here on the Crtv Thnkr Podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way. Hello and welcome to the Crtv Thnkr Podcast, where we talk about theories, philosophy, and all thought behind the creative process and creativity. Today, we've got a special treat. We have Shannon Kuguenko here today, who is a freelance illustrator who just made the big switch to going full-time. So I think that that's going to be a really great interview for you. My name is Henry Moon once again, and on my right, big news is the co-host of our program, Michael Vasquez. Hey, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. And I'm excited for this interview today.
Yeah, so me too. Shannon, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for how long?
Professionally?
Professionally and just like since you got your first piece of paper? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I've been drawing since I was old enough to hold a pencil. But I've been doing this professionally in some capacity for about 8 years now. 8 years. Wow, that's a good clip. And you're going full time now. Yes, I sure am. Up until the beginning of this year, of 2023, I was part-time day job and part-time freelance. And I've just been slowly building up my freelance portfolio and work so that I can go full-time freelance. So I'm making the jump.
Nice. I made the jump in photography several years ago, and it was one of the scariest but best decisions I ever made, but it was terrifying.
Yes. Yeah. There, of course, there's the plan B of, okay, I'm going to see how this goes for half a year to a year, decide then what I'm going to do next. But it's a exciting leap, but definitely there's a lot of weight on your shoulders all of a sudden because it's all you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So what in your freelance career gave you the idea that it was time and you were ready to make the switch?
Yeah, well, I started building up different streams of revenue. So I do a lot of different things. I do contract work with companies, commissions from people personally. I have an online shop. I have an Etsy shop where I sell stuff. And then I do local sales, whether that's markets or I have products in stores or galleries. So I'd been building those things up for years. Last year, I revamped my whole website and put all of my new work up there. I have, of course, a continuing list of these are all the pieces I want in my portfolio to cater to the markets that I'm trying to get work from. So I'd been building that up over the years. And at the beginning of 2023, I'd been working that part-time job for a really long time. And it just wasn't making sense anymore. You get to a point where you're at the job and it feels like I'm wasting my time here when I could be doing the work at home. And it had gotten to that point. Originally, I was working there about 4 days a week, and then it got to a point where I decided to go to 2 days a week because I hit that point. And I hit that point again where it felt like I can be doing more things with my time doing freelance and reaping more benefits from that than I am being here, being stuck in this place 8 hours a day, doing this work that I eventually want to quit anyway. So that's kind of what made me decide to go ahead and make that leap.
So what I'm hearing is, just to sum it up for those of us at home, is like having varied revenue streams. You've got a lot of ways to make money.
Yeah.
And then number two is that you ran out of time to do your day job, so to speak. It's like it's taken up so much of your day. And then the other thing was having very specific portfolios for each client.
Yes. Yeah. So kind of the two things that tie sort of together are the multiple streams of revenue and having, that focus. So within your portfolio. So I'm deciding that I want to focus on book illustration and editorial, and I'm building a portfolio there. And then that's one piece of it. And then I also have that online shop, those local sales, and those are, focused but varied pieces that all kind of play into each other. And then, yes, it's a nice feeling to think that, your day job actually is not doing as well for you. That steady paycheck is no longer benefiting you like doing that freelance stuff would be. So
it's one of the greatest feelings in the world.
Yeah.
You made it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Well, it's always work in progress, but you're there. You dove in head first, and this is the moment. I don't know. I miss those days, and so it's nice to hear about. But let's dive into the art a little bit. How did you develop your style? I mean, I could define it. It's made a lot of impressions on me. I know you just did the CD cover for the band I'm in. Name drop the Molly Moon Band. Check it out anywhere. Anyway, so you did the CD cover, and it looks beautiful, and I can't wait to share that with people.
Thank you.
And like I said, there's a lot of ways I could describe it, but I'd rather if you did. So how did you arrive at your style, and how would you describe it?
Sure. I would describe my style as being very organic focused, so organic shapes, a lot of curves, a lot of movement, and very nature inspired. So I draw a lot of plants, animals, people, not a lot of machinery and harsh angles and that sort of thing. And for me, that was just natural. I've definitely honed my style over the years, but it was sort of, from childhood, gravitating towards certain types of art and certain things that I wanted to draw, and kind of realizing that the art that I was looking at, that I was gravitating towards, there's a reason for that, and that's sort of what I want to be inspired by. So for me, it was a little bit easier. I know style can be a really tough thing to find, but for me, it felt pretty natural.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the color palette, there's some people who are naturals at it. It is not me at all. But was the color palette something that you happened into or worked your way into, or was that something that you were just sort of naturally gifted with?
That took a little more work, I'd say. Up until maybe a couple years ago, I preferred to work in black and white, and I struggled a little bit more with color. So while the line drawing and the subject matter feels a little more natural, I definitely had to work a lot on my color palette and sort of match the mood that I wanted to go for with my work to figure out what colors I wanted to use. So I want my work to feel comforting. I want it to be somewhat calming, even if the subject matter is a little more scary or exciting. I still want to have that base of when you look at it, you feel at ease. You feel like you can sit with it. It's not too energetic. So that's kind of how I got to the warm oranges and the blues and the greens. Plus, it just makes sense with the subject matter. If I'm drawing plants, there's a good chance there's going to be a lot of greens in there. So,
yeah, no, nice. There was something I noticed about the CD cover, which I guess even before it comes out, we could throw it up there. So we can toss it in the video so that you can see it. It's a beautiful piece, but it's not an ocean scene. It's myself and Molly, who I sing with. Sort of Gravity Pulls Us Down is the title, and we're sort of getting pulled through these different moments in our life. And it's not an ocean scene, but that's always what it calls to mind for me. And it's like the line work is very smooth and inviting. And like I said, it reminds me of just sitting on the beach. And when I saw the line work before the colors were put in, I thought, this is perfect how it is. It was black and white. It was, like I said, comforting, inviting, and it conveyed everything it needed to convey. And I was like, it's hard for me to picture the color is going to make this better. And then when I saw the colors, it was like, this is exactly as nuanced as it needs to be. And it's like the hues are close enough that, I don't know, everything just feels a little bit like sunset, a little bit like the natural things that you find. So it's not like avant-garde or neon or anything like that. It's just very... rustic is the wrong word, but natural colors. And so it's interesting to hear you describe it like that, because that just sort of clears up things for me.
Awesome. Wonderful. Yeah. And I worked really hard to make that work. So thank you.
Yeah.
I really had to limit myself and just say, okay, I'm just going to use a few colors and we'll go from there. And that's helped a lot. So
can I ask you one more thing about the cover? Is I know Molly and you conversed the most about it leading into it, but I just thought it was such a cool idea, and even though me and Molly had talked about what the proposal was going to be before we had reached out to you, it was wildly different from what I imagined and wildly better than what I imagined. And so would you mind, just for folks that are considering this as a career, maybe walking through what the client process was and how you created the idea of this cover art?
Sure. Yeah. So I knew the name of it first. I knew that what you guys had kind of given me the parameters were you wanted your faces in here somewhere. And I knew the name Gravity Pulls Us Down. And that was kind of where I started. For me, it's helpful to do some writing first, not full sentence writing, but what I would call mind maps, where I'm just writing down, concepts and kind of branching from there. So, for example, with that idea of gravity pulls us down, of course, I think of space and gravity and science, and I'm thinking about black holes and starting to think about what composition could include you guys in that. So some of the sketches that I pitched, the thumbnails, which are just very, very loose line drawings, had to do with you guys sort of being pulled into a black hole or kind of being in space. And I knew that was something that Molly, your bandmate, liked, that imagery. So I was also trying to keep that in mind for you guys. So the other concepts I pitched to you had more to do with space. This one was a little more personal because I knew some of the journey that you guys had been on. Molly told me about the idea of disillusionment being a strong theme in the album, and then also the idea of nostalgia. So kind of the combination and, moving towards something you think is going to be great and then finding out maybe it's not everything it was cracked up to be. And I knew, because I know you guys and because she's explained this to me, that has to do with location for you, for her thinking about the Northeast, for you thinking about Alaska. And so it kind of came together in that image of you sort of almost flowing through these planes of existence through time, of moving through these different places, some of which you dreamed to be in, some of which you didn't, and sort of how that disillusionment can occur there. But that was a lot more personal for you guys. But I think that's why that one worked the best.
So this calls to mind another question for me. Sorry, Michael, because I'm taking...
you're good.
taking all the questions. But the imagery that it calls to mind is always like everything to do with your art is more like waves coming up to the beach. It's sort of like leaves behind a couple rocks and they stay there for a little while, but the ones that don't really want to be at shore, for lack of a better way to put it, get washed out again. And it's sort of like that's how the process builds up. And so it kind of makes me curious, because I'm a pretty anxious person, and you seem pretty calm. And so I'm wondering if that's how you pursue life, or if that is something that you cultivated specifically for your art.
That's a really good question.
It's a tough one to just dump on somebody with no...
Tell me about your life philosophy.
Yeah. How do you feel in your heart right now?
Yeah. Well, I do deal with some anxiety in my life, but it has a lot more to do with social situations. When it comes to more life circumstances, I would say I'm more kind of on the page you're talking about. And I think in any situation, I want to look at, what's the hope that comes out of this? Everybody goes through life looking for some kind of hope, and everybody wants a place that they can be comforted and come back to and feel like they're at home. So when I work on art, I want to provide that for people. I want there to be it to almost feel like a resting place for them. So that's kind of how that ties in. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And is there, just because this is a good place for it, is there a website? What's your URL that we can plug?
Yeah, sure. So I mainly use the name Kuguenko illustration for my art.
You're going to need to spell that.
Yes. So Kuguenko is my last name. It's Ukrainian, and I will spell it for you. My website is just www.kuguenko.com. Kuguenko is Kuguenko. Uenko. And I assume we can maybe put that somewhere in the type for people.
Absolutely. So I find myself when I create art, as an anxious person, I like the idea of sort of dropping off my fatalism and my pessimism in my art pieces. And so it's like a nice little package. I drop it in there and I leave. And so for me, a lot of my art is straight lines and corners and just very, I don't know if they're necessarily unsettling, but it is like, it's a little bit impersonal, the art that I do. And so when I see yours, it's like, I have no idea how she got there.
You're just coming at it from two different sides.
Yeah.
But you need all of it. You need the variety.
But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
And, Michael, I'm including you because I took all the questions, buddy. So
Very good. So one of the questions I had is, as you're transitioning into full-time illustrator, what does your day-to-day look like? Because as someone who attempted that with personal training here, it was very tough for me because I didn't really have a lot of guidelines on what my day-to-day was supposed to be looking like.
Yeah.
So I kind of filled the day with things that I thought I needed to do. And it ended up not working out as far as personal training went for the company I was working with. So what does your day-to-day look like, or what does your week look like to continue hitting all these different streams of revenue?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And this is actually sort of the second time I've tried full-time freelance. The first time, I think I was not in the right place for it. This time, I'm in a little bit of a better place, but I can understand, that I just need to fill my time. If I just work this many hours, I think this is what I need to hit. But I think for me, it's really this time around, having the goals. Like you were saying, the different streams of revenue, I try to create sort of big picture schedules of what I'm looking for, and then kind of break it down from there and do the day-to-day of, okay, if I want to have this done by this date, what do I need to do to make that happen? And kind of checking in with how much time am I spending on this? And then also, what is the revenue that's coming back? What am I spending time on that's actually worth it? Because ultimately, if you spend a lot of time on something you love, but it doesn't bring you any money, then it's just a hobby. So
yeah. So when you're saying like the big picture thing for the week or the month, like what is that for you? Yeah.
So that would be, money, obviously.
Right.
But in a more specific way, that would depend on sort of the projects I'm being given at the time. So for example, I have a craft fair coming up in April, so part of that is going to be dividing my time into making sure I'm prepared for that. Some of that will be checking in with, the stores that I have products in, updating my online shop, and then any client projects I have. So really, I feel like the answer is it changes all the time.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Gotcha. So I was just more so thinking like, so when you say the big picture, and then kind of breaking it down, when you go, when you wake up, what is your full day going to look like? Or is even that different day to day? Like, do you hit, okay, I'm going to update my store. I'm going to update my Etsy. I'm going to start setting stuff out on Etsy. Are you still doing that on your own?
Yes.
Okay. So then like, what part of the day do you contribute to, all those different streams of revenue? Do you hit those every day? Is that something like, okay, Monday, I'm going to work on big project. Tuesday, I'm going to hit some of my other streams of revenue. Yeah.
So I would say that at this point, it's kind of varied. The idea, though, is what you're talking about, is to get it to a point where every day, this day is set aside for this day is set aside for this. Sometimes at this point, my work can be a little more reactionary because I'm still sort of settling into it. But I would say like a day for me, I know that I tend to work better in the mornings. I have more ideas and I'm fresher. So I'm going to start with, maybe not the admin stuff in the morning. For me, that's going to be more the creative stuff. And then I can do the admin stuff later. So I don't get bogged down by that for the day. Working from home, of course, I want to get in the studio as quickly as possible, because that's another thing that can, bog me down, is if I get out and I'll just clean this one thing. Oh, but what about this chore? Oh, but what about this chore? So part of it is just trying to wake up, get in the studio. I use a timer for myself to do different tasks, partially so I can track how much time I'm spending on each thing, and then also just to stay focused. So again, working from home, that's the biggest thing. There's so much distraction everywhere.
Right, yeah.
All my video games are on my computer,
Yep.
Yeah. So
How many people is that a problem for? Probably not us.
Nobody. Yeah, not at all. That's not common. No. So I'll start with the creative things. I will do that until probably around lunch. Take a break there. I do try to take a break midday and just take some time to do something I want to do, try to get that work-life balance in there.
Yeah, right, of course.
Yeah. And then after that, more of the afternoon would be more admin tasks, early afternoon for me. Typically, if I'm packing online orders, that's probably when I would do that.
Gotcha.
And then more towards the evening, late afternoon, evening, if I have more that I want to work on, those would be the things where they'd be creative but a little more relaxed. So for example, if I'm in the coloring stage of an album cover, that's when I would do that, but probably not the mind mapping planning stage. I would do something that I can kind of be doing other things and still have this happening going on and that sort of thing. So a little bit more of a cool down, if you will.
And in this transition, like obviously art is something that you're passionate about, something that you really love to do. Where do you find the balance between work, art, and then just art for you to do for fun? Or do you kind of get that fulfillment through the money? Yes,
that's a good question too. And that is actually something that I've had to figure out with going full-time freelance of, all right, I am passionate about this. I could spend 100 hours on this piece, but that doesn't make me money.
Right. Yeah.
So finding a commercial style, a streamlined process is one way I've done that. And then for me, my favorite hobby, one of my favorite hobbies is D&D. So, if I want to do art, but I just want it to be for me, a lot of times I'll draw D&D related things and more video game related things, more nerdy art. And like I showed you a little earlier, I've dabbled very baby dabbled in animation. So those are never things I would say I'm professionally good at, but I don't have to be. I can just play around and have fun. So I'll do that kind of art for me. Painted some minis for me. Okay. And I can just say, you know what? They don't have to be that great. I can just kind of just go for it haphazardly, slap some paint on. I like it. I'm done. So that's kind of where I relax.
Gotcha. Sounds good. With all the distractions that you have at home and a podcast that we talked about previously, how do you deal with version of writer's block, especially if you have timelines? We talked about how when we get writer's block, sometimes it's just for us and our own personal art, but you're actually this is your job now. You're getting a lot of income through this. How do you face that writer's block? Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it sometimes is a little easier for me because of all the different streams of revenue. So I try to always have multiple projects going on at once. So if I get to a place where I'm kind of stuck on one, I can move on to another one. I do think that some of it is just practice, over time, if you've pushed through that enough times, you kind of exactly how to get back into the flow. So I think that's something that I've just developed over time as well. You mind me asking what that looks like, getting back into the flow? Yeah, so that would basically, for me, because I can procrastinate sometimes, if I get intimidated by a project or I'm feeling stuck on a project, my natural tendency would be to just set it down. We'll think about that later. But the longer you wait, the worse it gets. So again, kind of going back to the timer thing, I think for me, just
instead of just setting it down for, a week or two or whatever and getting stale on it and then coming back to it, I'll just say, okay, I'm going to work on this for an hour today. And that's it. Like, I'm not going to set a specific task goal. I'm just going to say I'm going to work on this project for an hour and then I'll be done. And sometimes just taking the pressure off of, oh man, I have to finish, these sketches. I have to be at this point in the project. Taking the pressure of the goal off of it helps me to just get back into it and kind of naturally find the solution. I think where I typically get stuck is the planning process. So sort of what I was talking about with practice, I think just going through doing enough mind mapping or like planning for different projects and realizing that, okay, I can do this. The ideas will come is really helpful for me.
Nice.
So I think we had talked about right before this that, and a lot of people listening, I know relate, artists in general do, but it's perfectionism is always a problem in art. Yeah. And it's always, going to fight with you in terms of when you're done and how much you need to work on something. And are you pushing yourself enough and all that, all that self-doubt that comes in. And we were talking before this, that's something that you've dealt with or continue to deal with. Would you mind sort of describing that and how you cope with it? How have you made this into a career despite that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started doing this professionally, right after school, I got really paralyzed because I felt like I needed to, do the intelligent project that I needed to do to get the specific job I wanted. And it had to be, I had to market it exactly to the client that I wanted to get to. And I had to think really hard about what to do because you want to show your best stuff to potential clients. And I would just put so much pressure on myself to plan the perfect project. But of course, putting that much pressure on yourself doesn't really work out great. So I kind of got paralyzed with that. And I'm also naturally sort of a perfectionist. So, I can spend eons on one thing, getting all the details just right. And I've really learned to kind of just start. If you don't know exactly what to start, just start with something. Just start putting pen to paper. And the 70% rule has really helped. So there's a concept with dealing with perfectionism where if you're a perfectionist, you want to do 100% all the time, but that's not realistic. Nobody can do that. So the idea is that you just want to do good enough. Just hit 70%. And the time you spend getting from that 70% to that 100% is not worth it. The payoff is just not there. And I think for a lot of artists, you'll show your piece to somebody and you're like, oh my God, I hate this part of it. I hate that part of it. I could have done this differently. But the person looking at it just sees the overall piece and they're like, oh, that's great. So internalizing that, realizing it just needs to be good enough is really helpful. And then it's more fun, when you're not paralyzed by needing it to be perfect. It's just more fun. You can try more things. You can move on to different ideas. So it's sort of rewarding. Like you start getting that positive feedback of, oh yeah, this is fine. It doesn't need to be perfect. And it's really freeing. And then you continue and it works out and it gets easier.
I saw this study for photography that was really interesting. That was basically an eye map. They used a laser to trace where the participants in the study's eyes went on a particular photo. And it was this beautiful picture of a mechanic guy in his shop. And so he's just surrounded by tools. And it's like a super busy photo. Looks like a kind old man. And anyway, so they show people who consider themselves art enthusiasts spent 1 minute on the piece, and there's like a little squiggly line around the man himself. The next group of people they brought in were photography students, and they stared at it for, I think, 5.5 minutes on average. And there was a couple dots on his face. There was a couple on some tools around the room, and that was it. And then they had somebody who'd been a professional photographer for like 8-10 years or something like that come, and they stared, I think it was like for like 20 minutes. And there was a pretty detailed drawing of the photo. You could see the photo in the laser map.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like he looked at everything. And I think that that's a beautiful analogy. I think of that all the time of, you know, us as our own worst critic, because we see every single detail and we see it in so much detail. But somebody who's just an enthusiast who's probably going to buy the piece is just going to look at it for a minute and go, I really like that for some reason, buy and leave. Right. And that's your income. And that's not bad. Like for some reason, when we're starting off, it seems like people think that's a bad thing, but it's like, it's almost, it's better if you can catch those people in a little.
Yeah. and for me, because I'm doing commercial work, you know, I do illustration. So I'm not doing fine art where you're stepping into a gallery, you're connecting personally with this piece and deciding to buy it. It's more about how can I get people, the general public, to look at this and understand the concept, understand what I'm trying to get across to them, and have it be attention grabbing enough, because, you know, we know how distracting this world is. When people look at an image, at an ad or something like that, they're just spending a millisecond on that and then they're moving on. So exactly, the whole goal is how can I get this concept across to people as quickly as possible in a way that they're going to remember. So yeah, exactly, like playing into that in your design and not worrying about the details, because most people are not going to see the details.
For sure.
I think that's very powerful, that 70%, you know, rule. Because I think a lot of times, you know, outside of, I guess it is your job, but also like my job, I always try and achieve perfection. But, you know, like you said, that 70 to 100% sometimes isn't worth all the stress, and people are still going to have, or I'm still going to get the job done. And then of course we did a D&D session recently, and I was like, oh, I could have done this, but everyone had a good time with it. And it, you know, that really hits that 70% rule and actually makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah.
You know, like I think that should take a lot of tension and pressure off of people thinking about, you know, the effort it takes from 70 to 100 is just so much more than at least getting to that 70%.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody knows exactly, you know, what you had in mind originally, but they know that the main idea that you wanted to get across got across, and everybody had fun. So it works out.
Yeah.
And I think I saw another study that was like the 0 to 70%. Let's say it takes 3 hours. I don't remember the exact details, but let's say it takes 3 hours, and then the 70 to 100 on average also took 3 hours. So it's literally you're doubling the time of your project.
Exactly.
For what is not, like you said, a good financial payoff.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I had another question that slipped my mind. Save me, Michael.
Let me look at my notes real quick.
So if you had a dream project, what would it be? What is the thing that keeps you motivated? What's the dream ahead of you?
Yeah.
That's sort of lighting the way.
I've always wanted to get into book illustration. So some children's books, and also like young adult or chapter books where you're getting maybe little mini illustrations at the start of the chapter, or an occasional large, you know, full page illustration, but it's like a chapter book. Those sorts of books really influenced me as a kid. That's kind of what I always go back to as the start of my passion for art. And I love storytelling. That's why I got into illustration. That's why I want to, you know, why I am an artist, is to tell stories. So that would be the dream, is to be in that market, and that be my main sort of source of income.
Well, I think you got a good shot at it, because like I said, all the art of yours that I've seen is very sort of sweet and warm and welcoming. And it makes me think of a lot of the kids' books that I really loved growing up. That the older I get, the more I realize it was the pretty pictures that made me love the story more than it was the story. I think, was it Frog and Mr. Toad? Anybody read that?
Oh, I know. I didn't read it, but I know exactly. I can picture the illustrations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't even know what it's about. I know there was 2 of them. Yeah.
I absolutely judge books by their cover.
Yeah.
Same. So,
I think I just had one more technical question on my end. Again, relating to a podcast that we've done before. How do you go back through your art and give yourself feedback on your art, or what's your form of feedback on your art before you present it to whoever you're presenting it to?
Yeah. So, you know, as an illustrator, I have a whole whole list of things, right? I think about, the composition and color and design. So I sort of go through that list for myself. I know because, I've been doing this for so long what my weaknesses are. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about color. So that's definitely something I'm still working on. So I'll pay close attention to those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. It's, of course, always good to kind of get feedback from other people. But before I take that step, I usually try to kind of look at those design elements on my own. I try to go back over what was the concept? What was the mood I was trying to get across? Did I get lost in a rabbit trail doing something else? Is this getting the concept across that I wanted it to? And leaving things for, maybe a day or two, coming back to it, getting fresh eyes on it is really important for me. Because if you have spent 10 hours on a project in, the course of 2 days, you're just so, you're so kind of deep into that, it's really hard to step back and get a fresh perspective on it. So I'll leave projects for a couple days. At
what point have you had to look at and spend hours and hours on a project and take a step back, look at it, and you're like, nah, this isn't it. This is not my best work. What does that process look like? Yeah.
So that does happen sometimes. Right. And I really try to stick with things till the end. Again, it's kind of going back to the 70% sometimes where it's maybe not the perfect piece or the perfect concept, but if it's good enough, I'll keep going with it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes I find that I got too caught up in the details too fast, and then there's structural issues with this piece now. Mm-hmm. So that I kind of do the preventative side on that, where I really try to spend a lot of time planning, a lot of time drawing thumbnails, a lot of time drawing what I call comps, which are kind of in between thumbnails and the real piece. So I'll do...
When you say a thumbnail, do you mean do you literally just mean the thumbnail you would see on a video? You're that's just a brief sketch?
Yeah. Cool, it's just cool. This a 2 inches by 2 inch sort of size, and it's just very, very brief sketch of, all right, if I'm drawing you guys in space for your album cover, here's where the black hole is going to be. Here's the little stick figures, essentially. Yeah. And it's just the very base. Where's the composition? Does this all fit together in this piece? Okay, yes, it does. There it is. And then from there, I would start to gather reference photos, whatever I need for that. If there's a moon in this picture, I would get a bunch of different images of a moon and kind of compromise between compromise between all of them. So for you guys' album cover, I got on your Facebooks and I looked for photos of you, just a bunch of different photos, so I had this general idea, and from there I'll do what I called comps. So they're still very small. They might be 3 by 3 kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I'll do a little bit more detailed drawing. I might do some sketches if there's some element of the piece I've not drawn before, like a different type of animal I haven't drawn before. I'll do some separate sketches to kind of get an idea of how I want to do that. Then I'll add black and white values to make sure that the darks and lights are balancing each other well and that they play into the composition how I want them to. If I want your eye to move through the composition a certain way, then I'll kind of work out that piece of the puzzle there. Then I add color. I decide what color palette I want. I need to make sure that still plays well into those darks and lights. So I'll add that. And then I start the actual piece. So doing all of that planning work usually prevents me from getting to the 50% mark and saying, ooh, I need to go back to the beginning. So a lot of that's the preventative thing. But sometimes it just happens that way, and you just have to accept it and start again. So
it's so much work.
Yeah. It's all the work that all the behind the scenes work, that people don't see. But yeah.
And do you find what part of your brain do you feel you're inhabiting the most when you create? Do you find that you're more cerebral, you're telling yourself, okay, I need to shade in more over here, I need to add this line a little bit further out to the right? Or do you hit a point where it becomes almost emotional? I'm not sure how to describe that, but I think every artist knows when you hit the zone, right? That's what everybody calls it. But it's you hit this space where you sort of, the cerebral part of your brain drops off and you're just sort of pushing colors and lines around, which is a beautiful space, but a lot of people inhabit them a different amount. So I'm just sort of curious.
I'd say it depends on the project and the point in the project I'm at. I'd say I kind of go in and out of that space. My favorite part is the line work. So when I've done all the planning, all the structural stuff, and I have a sketch on the final piece, and then I start going in with that final line work, that's probably the most like in the zone I get with that. But it ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's projects where I'm in the planning stages and I'm feeling that because it's just everything is just flowing. Everything's just coming easily. And then kind of what you're talking about with the writer's block, sometimes you have to get it's a little more analytical. It's a little more, all right, one step at a time kind of thing. So it can depend on project as well.
So I heard that you used to sketch in ink.
Yes.
Yes. First of all, that's got to be pretty. I mean, you have to be pretty in the zone for that. So I guess it doesn't surprise me that you were that's the part you enjoy the most, because it feels like if you're sketching in ink, I'm sure some people listening are getting anxious just hearing that. It's so permanent. It's hard to So if you're not really feeling it, then I don't know. That sounds like it'd be crippling.
Yeah. It definitely takes some planning, and not always, but if you're doing a final piece, you better know what you're doing, because once you put something down and it dries, that's it. I still actually do a lot of sketching in pen and ink, mainly in my sketchbook, kind of for that reason where it loosens me up, because once the line's down, that's it. So I just move on. But that's a little easier to do in a sketchbook than a final piece. Yeah. But yeah, the flow of the line work, the feeling of putting down and picking up ink, that's kind of where I hit my zone.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now your illustrations are mainly digital. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So what made you make the switch, and what was that like, if you don't mind me asking? That's a big thing to me. A lot of the people I've spoken to, not on the podcast, but just informally, they're very protective of the art form that they're in. And that is, I think about tennis a lot too. Once people found a racket that worked, they never changed. And so how did you convince yourself to get out of the routine? Why did you? And are you loving it?
Yeah. I really love working digitally now. I learned how to work digitally mainly in school and college. I had a teacher that was incredible, because I never would have figured it all out on my own, but he made it really easy for me. And I originally did prefer working traditionally, but I would work in ink or in gouache, and a lot of times I would get comments from professors.
Hang on 1 second. What is gouache?
Right?
Yeah. So gouache is a not very commonly known type of paint. That there's two types of gouache. I won't get into all the nitty gritty.
I still don't know what gouache is. There's two kinds. You're leaving me behind in a hurry.
So gouache is it's almost like a cross between acrylic and watercolors. You can water it down and work on paper, and it can be really transparent. You can, if you've ever done like a watercolor wash where you're just adding a little bit of color and sort of letting it bloom or move on the paper by itself, you can do that. But then you can also get these really opaque matte finish layers that you can layer over each other. So it has a very graphic look to it. Old like graphic design, a lot of times they'd use gouache for that, because it has such an even flat layer, and it's so opaque that there's not a lot of variation in it if you're just using it as an opaque medium.
Gotcha. Okay, so now we have the gouache. Everybody's all gouached up and ready to go. So you are using ink and gouache, and then how did you get to digital?
Yeah, so I would get a lot of comments because my work was so even that, man, you might as well have done this digitally. It would have looked the same. And of course, traditional work, it takes longer. You have to plan even more, because once that line is down, once that paint is down, that's mainly it. You can do a little bit of layering with gouache, but depending on what type you're using, not as much. It'll pick back up if you start putting water on it. So digital being so much more flexible and quick, and especially now, a lot of illustrative work is remote. And so, you have to scan that anyway and make it into a digital file to send your client. And it just felt like it was sort of like bridging that gap. It just made sense. The process catered so much better to digital work, and especially thinking about the money making element of it. I know I'm not a particularly fast worker, so if I can cut down time working digitally versus working in ink, I mean, why not? Why not do that? And I enjoy the digital work, so that helps too.
And the bigger the client, I find, at least in photography, the more notes they have, the more things that they want to adjust.
Yes.
And once you hit that level of client, it's like, there's no way you can do traditional because you're going to have to start from scratch and rebuild the whole thing. Yeah,
there are people that do it, but I don't envy them. I like, even though, there's some incredibly beautiful, high-end traditional working illustrators that I very much admire. I do want that flexibility. And it is so much easier to just do that when you have things on different layers and you can just say, all right, you want this vase to be purple? Great. I'm just going to take this little slider. Now it's purple. Now we're done. You don't have to go back in with paint and hope you can fix it.
Yeah, no, it's a great, what's the word? Michael, you got to save me again, buddy. No, it's a relief. It's a comfort. It's something that I just have to say that. And then I remember what I was going to say.
Just put you on the spot occasionally.
I had no idea what you were going for.
Just got to make sure you're paying attention.
I am. I'm here.
No, it's a great comfort to be able to just make little nuanced changes right there at the end. I've had clients before ask for an entirely different photo than I've presented them with. It's not like, hey, can you change the color? And hey, can you get that out of the background? It's like, what if we had the same person at the same time and they were doing this instead? And it's like, that's a totally different shoot at this point. I can't go back. Yeah. That person's older. Like every shoot, even especially most of my work is outside. So it's like, I'm never going to get that light again.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I forgot to mention about digital is that it's portable. And that's a big advantage too, is I can take it anywhere with me, where while watercolors are fairly portable, you got to deal with all the mess. So that's also really nice.
And you have as much paint as you're ever going to use on your computer already.
It's so true. It's so very true. Art supplies are not cheap.
Like the biggest thing for me at my house is where am I going to store all of my hobbies?
Yes, absolutely. Heard.
I've gotten them all to be where they'll fit in like a tote box. But I always find that I'm missing at least one thing when I do that.
Yeah. That's really impressive though. One little tote box. You're doing pretty good. Yeah. Yep.
It's mostly just forgetting things.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we talked a little bit before, and we're getting kind of towards the end. I'm going to ask you to plug your website one more time before we leave, so don't let me forget that, Michael. But we had talked about some of our other podcasts. I know we touched on perfectionism a little bit, but is there anything else that you wanted to talk about while you were here? Just wanted to give you a second to think about it, and I'll vamp for a little while. So. Okay. We are changing a few format things here on the Crtv Thnkr Podcast. So the last Monday of every month, we're going to have interviews with great professionals like Shannon. And we are happy to bring you that. But as we expand and get the studio bigger and all of our computers and microphones and lighting and all that stuff, it helps us out a ton if you go and support the podcast. So that would be over at anchor.fm/CRTV THNKR. That's Creative Thinker without the vowels. Anything you can do, any amount you want to do it in, it's all a great help. And we are happy to keep providing you with creative content that inspires you and pushes your capabilities. So that's what we're here for. And we've been really grateful for the support of our community. So thank you so much. Now, Shannon.
Yes. Yeah. I would say maybe just as a advice to people starting out in any creative field, find a community of people that are going to be really honest with you about what's not working in what you're doing. So for me, I was fortunate to get some of that in school. We would have critiques where you would put your finished piece on the wall and everybody would line up and it was great because you would also get to critique other people. So you're thinking critically about other people's work, which then helps you think critically about your own work. And it helps you to see something you admire and say, you know what, I love the way that they use color. I want to try to incorporate that in what I do. So getting that feedback, finding a community where you can bounce ideas off of each other, get really honest feedback, get feedback from people that are, you know, further along in their career than you is really powerful. And of course, when you're working from home, you can, you know, it can be very isolating. So having a community of people that are kind of in the same boat with you, that are going through some of the same struggles, that's really good too. And kind of on that note, for a lot of artists, we're trained in the art, but we're not really trained in the business. So even speaking with different business people that aren't in the art field and figuring out what are they doing well, how are they handling their marketing, especially when in other fields sometimes business is a little more of the schooling. You can learn a lot from them as well. So just finding a community that's gonna really push you and getting out of your comfort zone in that way is something that I found to be really helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice. I just saw an interview with Mr. Beast, and there's another saying that's like, you are your 5 closest friends, right? And so it's like how you structure your business and how you structure everything in your life. It relates to your circle of friends, is the short version of that. But they just did an interview with Mr. Beast, who's it's his YouTube name. I don't know his real name, but anyway, so he did an interview that said he wouldn't be famous if it weren't for the 4 or 5 YouTubers he knew when he started, who are all big now. And he's like, you can learn way quicker if you're not by yourself, because at the end of the week, you talk to all 5 of them and they say, I made this mistake, I made this mistake, I made this mistake. You have 5 different things not to do at the end of that week instead of just the one that you learned.
Exactly.
So it can really expedite the process, and it can also make you feel like less of a turd if you make a mistake.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Learning how somebody else has made a mistake before you have the chance to make it is really valuable. Yeah. And, you know, just getting the feedback from somebody who maybe has different strengths than you. And, you know, it's hard to see your own weaknesses sometimes. So getting somebody else's perspective who, for me, that might be somebody who's really good at color. So they, you know, if I can get a critique from them about what I can do better with color, that's going to be something that I would have taken years for me to get there on my own. So what you're saying about expediting that process, it's really true.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me, I'm just thinking about something you said earlier, was that I didn't address my pitfalls when I was running my photography company pre-COVID. So like, you know, something, if you go to Walmart, like their biggest push is to stop theft. And that's their biggest loss as their company. And all major companies that are succeeding well find their weaknesses and they address them. And I think with artists, especially when they're starting to go full time, they neglect that. They put all their effort and focus into, let me make the best product possible. And it's because of a love for that product and that desire to go to that 70 to 100. But instead of doing that 70 to 100 time, if you can do a deep dive with somebody you trust to say, what are my weaknesses in this field? And find ways to address each and every one of them. I think that that's worth at least, 20-30% of your time. Yeah. Especially early on.
Absolutely. And if you can find little steps to take in that direction to improving yourself and those weaknesses, that is enough. Just if you can keep taking those small steps, because it can be really scary to start to address some of the weaknesses, because there are also things you might not be comfortable with in your business. So for example, for me, I talked about having a little more social related anxiety. So of course, as a business person, you gotta put yourself out there. You gotta go to events. You gotta talk to people. So if I can find ways to just slowly, take those small steps, find ways to make it a little more comfortable for myself that's an incredible help. So for example, when I moved to the place we live now, to North Carolina, I knew that if I just sat in my house all day and made art, I was never going to meet a single person in the area. Mm-hmm. So I got a job at an art supply store, and I got to meet people around the community. I got to talk with other artists that were in the area and learn from them and make friends. And that's been just a massive help for me in getting to know the art community here. Instead of saying, okay, I guess I have to go out to this event this Friday and stand in a, room full of people and try to talk to somebody. Well, now I'm working at the art supply store, and it's really natural for me to start to talk to people, and it's a lot more of a comfortable, casual setting for me. So just trying to find those little ways to put yourself out there, and whatever your weakness is, you don't have to do it all at once. You can take those steps slowly and kind of work your way up. It's okay to fail at them sometimes.
Yeah.
That's a pretty aggressive first step, though. I mean, if you're like, I'm scared of being in front of people, I'm going to get a job where I'm in front of people all the time. That's a pretty aggressive step.
But I get to talk about what I love, which is art. So it makes it a little less intimidating.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at is like the older I get, especially, I think it's that anyway. Maybe I'm just finally learning something that was simple, but the older I get, it's like I'm finding it easier to get down to what I really love about what I do, which makes it so much easier to promote it, because it's like, I love this and it has nothing to do with me. It's like, I like taking pictures of this. I like taking portrait pictures. But it's because I like to give people, sort of like the old style photos where, they sit down in front of you, and you're probably only going to do that once with this person, but you're going to give them, this is them at that age. You're going to give them a family heirloom photo, right? That's my goal, at least. And so that has nothing to do with me, in my mind, at least. So maybe there's some mental trickery happening, but it's like, it's easy for me to promote that. But when I started, and when I first started doing like the side hustle thing, it was like, well, I've got this camera. I like taking pictures of people. And if you want to pay me, that would be okay.
Yeah. If you have a vision that people can get on board with, like you were saying, capturing that heirloom photo, that's really meaningful to somebody. So if you can find that thing that's going to give your clients or your customers that meaning, it makes it easy.
Yeah, it's 100%. Michael?
Yes.
I'm throwing it over to you. I just figured I'd keep the theme of the episode. It's like a sub theme. We just keep kicking it over to you for no reason. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We have fun. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that's maybe not out inside the realm of art even, that's just something that has occurred to you in your pursuit of art, in your pursuit of taking this next step in your career? Is there anything that's occurred to you in the process that you feel like would be good for someone else to know if they were thinking about making the next step or finally putting themselves out there? I mean, one of the most impactful things that at least to me is hearing you say, yeah, this isn't the first time I've done this, which is the best, because for me, I've already done it once, and I'm doing it a second time with the Henry Moon Media and then the podcast, but it's still like, it's not as intense as like, this is my only income. And so it's just like a great boon to me to hear that and say, well, yeah, okay, there are second chances. That's great. Yeah,
that's actually where my brain was starting to go when you asked that question. So this is perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, the fear of failure, and that it's actually okay to fail, and to, not even necessarily see it as, oh, I've failed. That has such a it's such a powerful
irrevocable
word. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's like, actually, this is just the season that I'm in right now. And so with that, I think with me being, a little more socially anxious, a little more perfectionistic, the first time around, especially with social media, you put out there that you're doing this full time. Now the pressure's on. Now, everything you put out has to be perfect. It has to be exactly your brand, and it's really important to be consistent, which is true. But I would get scared of that. And what if I failed and everybody's going to know, they're going to see that Shannon failed at this. And there were all these, expectations for me going into it. And I've kind of gotten to a point sort of out of necessity of like, that just can't have that much pressure on it. It's okay to try it and it doesn't work out and you move on, and people actually aren't thinking about you that much. So
you're just like, cool, they're still out there doing the thing. Not
that much pressure, but to me at least, it can feel like that much pressure.
100%. So. Yeah, me too. And I did a lot of small jobs when I first started. It was like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to let go of the consistency of this job just yet. So I started taking like, small odds and ends kind of jobs. It was like a month here, a month there, a month there. And every time I did, I was like, oh, you failed again. You're back here, but it's like, I just needed that consistency. And that's another thing where it's like, that's a shortfall for me. It's like, I'm so anxious that it's like, okay, well, I need something consistent. I got to grab onto something consistent. And I do that every so often. And addressing that, I did address it, but I'd like to address it in a way that doesn't detract from my time. So that's a good thought for me going forward, I think. So
yeah, and also there just not being shame and needing, if that feels comfortable to you, like great. Sometimes there is a place to step out of your comfort zone to say, you know what, this is uncomfortable, but it's worth it. I'm going to go full time. And sometimes you just want your job to just be your job, and you get to come home and actually do, the creative stuff as a hobby, and sort of making that decision too is important. That was something that I thought about as well. Do I want to just get, a desk design job for a company and have those benefits and have that 401k and, and that's perfectly fine. I can still do the other stuff for me and that's okay. So of course, if the freelance doesn't work out for me this time, that probably is what I'll do. But either way, it's fine. There's not, there's not a right or wrong answer, and it can change over time. So.
Well, Shannon, it was great having you on. And I want to say, like, we definitely haven't dived into shame enough on this podcast and addressing that as an idea. Well, Michael's laughing. It's like, well, we've made fools of ourselves enough. I think that's the thought there.
Yeah.
But we haven't talked about it in a way that's positive enough. That's my pledge to you as we go forward. We're gonna dive into shame in a positive way. But just to sum up, thank you so much for your time on this podcast. It was great getting to hear from you. I really love your work, and getting to hear you talk about it is equally wonderful, which is not true of a lot of people. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And if you want to shout out your website one more time.
Shout out that website.
And any other places that we can follow you. I don't know if you have social media that you can plug as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah. So yes, I'm Shannon Kuguenko. I'm a freelance illustrator. I go by Kuguenko Illustrations, so just by my last name. It's spelled Kuguenko. My website is just www.kuguenko.com. And my handle on social media is just my last name, Kuguenko. So Kuguenko on Instagram and TikTok.
Thank you so much, and best of luck going forward. I can't wait to see that first children's book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. This was the Crtv Thnkr Podcast. Thank you, Michael, for being the co-host of the show. Yeah, there you go. Throwing up the heart. Watch us on Spotify. We just did a social media platform. So we are at CRTV Thnkr on Instagram. Hit us up over there if you want to be a interviewee on our show, like Shannon. If you want to be cool like Shannon, check us out over there. Send us a message. Support us on anchor.fm/CRTV Thnkr. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.